Now we go into another topic that is also rather interesting. It is about the Cyber Resilience Act. So why is this relevant or important for our community? Well, this is becoming a priority across industries, and the Cyber Resilience Act introduces significant compliance requirements for manufacturers, especially those involved in the IoT and smart buildings. So in this panel, we have cybersecurity experts that will explore the specifics of the CRA. They will share with us their experiences and what they are busy with. So we'll discuss the impact on product design, data protection, market competitiveness. Yeah, manufacturers will gain insights into how to adapt their operations, integrate security by design, and leverage this regulation as an opportunity to enhance their customer trust. So some key topics, implications for smart home and building automation products, security by design, compliance challenges and strategies for seamless integration, the role of the certification and labeling in building consumer trust, and how proactive cybersecurity can become a competitive advantage. So now I'm going to welcome our panelists into the live discussion. Hello. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Jesus.
And we are waiting for Jonathan. There we go. Hello. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes. That is your image. Your camera is frozen. I don't know if that's maybe you can switch off and switch on again. Okay. If your bandwidth is not the best and you want to keep your camera switch off, that's also fine. It's up to you. All right. So thanks a lot for joining. This is our second session today. This is a very hot topic. I know this is pretty much on daily discussions with our manufacturers. They are very aware of the Cyber Resilience Act and the challenges that implies in their operations. So everyone wants to know a bit more. I'm happy I have you both here. Chris, you will now introduce yourself. AT Sign is a new KNX member. You joined the association a few months ago. And Jonathan works for SafeShark. You're founder, if I'm not mistaken, but you will introduce yourself now. And we happened to meet in one event in the UK where your company was talking about this very interesting topic. So welcome both. Please, Chris, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thanks. So good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Swan. I'm an engineer at a company called AtSign. We've been building a platform now for a little over 5 years to enhance privacy and security. That's found its way into a number of IoT gateways and IoT products. And most recently, we've been shipping a product for secure remote access. So that's got me involved in things like software bill of materials and supply chain levels for software assurance.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Jonathan, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so we've been working in the cybersecurity space for about almost 10 years now. Initially, as a consumer proposition, we used to provide applications and services to consumers to allow them to scan their home networks to find if there are any devices with vulnerabilities. However, what's more relevant for today is that business pivoted into SafeShark, which means we now work more closely with the manufacturers and the installers and the resellers of equipment to ensure that the products are compliant before they reach the market. And so that's why I'm here to talk about not just CRA, but also the predecessors, RED and PSTI, if that's not too many acronyms. And our SafeShark is a compliance and testing house where we do some fairly innovative techniques of doing automated testing of devices on behalf of manufacturers, installers, resellers, or distributors in order to ensure that the devices comply with the relevant laws for the territory that they're going to be sold in. So yes, we're London-based, and we have labs in various different locations, and work with the likes of LG, Philips, Sony, and other that type of manufacturers, the kind of customers we have, mainly in the media space.
A very quick first question, Chris. Have you noticed any traction in your business because of the Cyber Resilience Act or the similar new legislation coming in the US and in the UK?
So it's not something that's yet coming up in conversations. If I kind of look across at the US, which is where our company was founded, their executive order around infrastructure security back in 2021 really got the ball rolling on things like software bill of materials. But we're 3 years past that now, and we can see that actually uptake is slow. So when I talk to customers about things like open source security foundation scorecards, SBOMs, and SALSA, that's still quite often a new topic to them. And it's also one where I get a sense that getting us to supply stuff that's already had that done is seen as favorable versus organizations trying to do that for themselves because of the cost and complexity that they associate with that.
Yeah, we have a similar experience with a KNX association. We actually are in charge of the specifications of the KNX standard, and we introduced security for our classic part of the ecosystem, which is a twisted pair and radio frequency. So we introduced that a few years ago, and it's not that the manufacturers jump into it immediately because of the challenges to, for example, update a whole portfolio with security. It's a lot of cost involved, and also in the value chain from manufacturing to system integration, it makes it more complex. So yeah, it's not something that happens overnight. Jonathan, same question for you. Since you do testing, security reports, have you noticed a pickup in the business because of the upcoming Cyber Resilience Act?
Well, if I rewind slightly, because the very first kind of mandated standard, which is the PSTI, which is if you like, a subset of CRA that was mandated in the UK in December 2023, that made it mandatory, and it also meant that for market access requirements, manufacturers had to resolve it. So effectively, some manufacturers were forced into that position. What RED and the CRA are bringing to is maybe more of a consciousness of manufacturers, instead of having to do it because it's required, wanting to do it because it's going to make their product better. So we see it as much as being a carrot as opposed to a stick to try and help companies want to make their products as good as possible. The other thing I'll add to that mix is the companies we work with, I've mentioned a few of them, recognize that the earlier they get us involved in their product's development chain, the easier it is to solve problems. It's far harder to fix something that's got to production stage and it's actually in the marketplace than it is if it's still in the development phase. So the answer to that is yes, we have noticed it happening. The CRA, not so much yet, but certainly with PSTI and RED, which are, if you like, more in the consciousness of the manufacturers we're working with. And just to echo one of Chris's points as well, so for distributors or retailers in particular are becoming aware, and now some of the biggest retailers in the UK will not stock products that do not have the relevant certification. So again, that's another reason for the manufacturers not just to want to, but to have to go through this process.
All right. Well, after this warm up, let's do a few questions here and see your feedback. So I collected some preview I was surveying our manufacturers and see what they want to know about the Cyber Resilience Act. So let's see a few questions and what your opinion is on that. So what challenges do you foresee for manufacturers in our industry, which is home and building automation, when implementing the Cyber Resilience Act requirements, especially when looking at the product life cycle management? So please, your opinion, Chris. Yeah, please go ahead.
So I'll start with software bill of materials, because that's something that I think we've already seen that act play out a little bit in the US. And so the Cyber Resilience Act, we've got 3 years to go before adopted by council less than a month ago, with a 2027 implementation window. And I think also that might end up being a bit squishy, like GDPR was. That people will get to 2027 and find that actually the work was more than they were expecting, and stuff is running late, and there's likely to be affordances on how ruthlessly the act is enforced.
Yeah.
All that aside, if we look at embedded software in particular, it's normally C.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at the tooling right now for generating a software bill of materials for a C project, it's almost non-existent. And so if I'm using a modern package managed language like, say, Rust, then it's very easy for me to generate a software bill of materials. But most stuff isn't being written that way yet. And we've also got a lot of legacy that we're dragging along with us. So even if we're writing something new, it might be using a whole bunch of older libraries. So where do I actually get those building blocks for my software bill of materials? And I think there's going to be opportunities here for certified stacks and for the investment in the software bill of materials to be sort of mutualized by having commonly used stacks and thus commonly used software bill of materials elements within those stacks. But having already kind of had 3 years at this in the US, we can kind of look ahead to the 3-year implementation window and think it's already too close for getting the pieces in place in order to produce this evidence. And the act is saying to people, don't ship a product with known vulnerabilities. Now, this was one of the aspirations behind the original executive order in the US, but vulnerabilities are popping up every day. And so that's something that could very easily catch you out at the last moment. And that then brings us into the maintainability aspects. The act's also saying you've got to be able to update these things while they're out deployed in the field, and that you've got to provide security updates for a minimum of 5 years. And so that's implying a mechanism that's very responsive to known vulnerabilities and able to get patches out there in the field. Now, if we look at practice today, it's really just not set up to do that. And so there's an awful lot of work to be done over the next 3 years to try and get there.
I see. Sorry, Jonathan, before we go into your contribution, one of the questions now we already see is in the chat, what's, based on your experience, the impacts on a company redesign of hardware and firmware, software, internal processes, linked to quality, supply chain? I mean, you mentioned them all. First of all, the impact of in your company redesign. Well, if you already have a comprehensive bill of materials, if you know all your items, you can tackle that with more easy. But also approaching the delivering products, solutions with no vulnerabilities. That's linked to your quality surveillance, how you monitor your products that you put in the market, supply chain, if you need to upgrade firmware. There's a lot of implications there, right?
Absolutely.
Jonathan, so what is your 2 cents on the challenges for the manufacturers in the home building automation?
Yeah, I'm going to focus on the product lifecycle side of it. So we think that is quite important. And that is because we notice, particularly within home automation systems, is they have far longer longevity within a home than, let's say, a television might do. And that's quite often because they're installed and fitted and sometimes even bolted into the walls or behind the walls. And that creates some issues in terms of how you are able to support an update. Both the CRA and PSTI talk about being able to maintain software updates for a minimum period of time and to disclose vulnerabilities and to fix critical vulnerabilities within that period of time. That then becomes an issue of, firstly, how does the consumer or the end user actually maintain it? How do they keep it updated? How do they actually know what systems actually exist in the house, particularly if it's been installed by a professional installer? Or does that become the responsibility of the installer to keep it maintained? And secondly, if there's a fault or a vulnerability that cannot be fixed in software, it's at a hardware level.
Yeah.
How are you gonna tear the walls up, or the heating? Things like heating controllers, lighting controllers often are hidden away in walls, and we see that as an issue that's we notice when we've been doing audits with the likes of CBI and others, that people keep control systems for quite a long time because if they work, they don't want to remove them, even though there might be known vulnerabilities in them. And that's the kind of message we want to get across: how do we patch those, or at least understand how to update them and have that as part of the product lifecycle. So yes, I don't have a solution proposed. All I'm saying is we notice there's a longer period. The types of control systems tend to sit particularly in residential homes, for a longer period of time than traditional tech like TVs and Wi-Fi's and so on.
Yeah, those implications on the actual hardware-related vulnerabilities. That's a very interesting topic because to fix it, you need to replace hardware, and like you say, many people just keep things running until they break heavily. And those vulnerabilities are not perceived as something that leads to change or update systems. So it's a lot of implications for the manufacturers here. Well, we have questions. We're gonna keep one more question that we have already in our list, and then we'll go to the Q&A that already our audience is eagerly posting here. So how do you see the Cyber Resilience Act affecting the security management of on-premises and or cloud-based solutions? Now we are going into the technical aspect of how solutions are offered. So there are on-premises solutions, like the hardware you were mentioning, Jonathan, could be on-site. There is no internet connectivity. But there are also now with the IoT wave of solutions, there are services that connect to IoT devices that are on the IP network. So that's a cloud-based connectivity. What do you think are the challenges with the Cyber Resilience Act and these two approaches? Any one of you?
Jonathan, why don't you go first this time?
So absolutely fine. So a lot of these standards you mentioned focus on the product itself or the device, how it works in the kind of bubble, and not necessarily take enough impact on what the actual infrastructure, the cloud. It's almost impossible to test the cloud as an infrastructure, but we can test the device. So particularly RED and PSTI that we're currently testing very much focus on the device security as its own in and of itself, because that's what you're certifying. However, you've identified that there are many systems now that have cloud-based servers. They push content, either, let's say, CCTV cameras that push content up to the cloud, or the ability to control systems from a cloud-based interface. And then the cloud itself becomes a vulnerability as well. And as a security professional talking, I believe the whole system has to be, you can't just test the device and say that's safe. The whole ecosystem has to be tested. I personally don't think the likes of RED, PSTI, and possibly CRA, but it's not clear yet, go far enough to doing that. But secondly, I don't know how they'll do it because it's a really hard thing to test the cloud. The problem is the number of permutations become very huge, so you have to have a number of use cases that you can test. A good example I'll give for it is, for example, systems that sit on the cloud, like I gave CCTV example before. It's the appetite for risk is very different for different users. For example, somebody that's using a camera to look at their driveway may have a very different security risk than somebody using exactly the same camera to look into the children's bedroom. Because of the implications. So you need to make sure that you're applying the right kind of security for those cloud-based systems as the user expects.
Yeah. You said one thing, sorry, Chris. You said it's not clear with the Cyber Resilience Act yet. One of the questions is, are the CRA requirements finalized? Jonathan, you know?
So I believe they're still in flux. We don't sit on CRA directly. We sit on both the Senelec board for RED and the TC Cyber boards for the UK requirements. So we're very kind of familiar with the progress and application of those. I don't know where the ratification for the final draft of CRA is at present.
Okay. Thank you.
Chris might be able to shed some more light on that one.
Yeah, in my kind of snooping around this, it's CRA itself was approved by council last month, but the implementation details are very fuzzy right now. If we look at regulation in general, I think we can see three kinds of regulation. So rules-based regulation, principle-based regulation, and comparative regulation. And if I was to pick out examples of those from, say, financial services, we see rules-based regulation in places like Singapore, with the Monetary Authority of Singapore there being very, very precise and specific about what must and must not happen. Principles-based regulation tends to be more of a kind of Anglo-American thing, and is quite commonly swept over into Europe, where a regulator puts out a set of principles and then expects things like audit companies to actually measure organizations against those principles and make determination of whether those are being met. And then comparative, my best example of that is in Switzerland, where the regulator there would compare different organizations to their peers and say, if your peer is doing this thing, then maybe you ought to be doing it as well. And if you're not doing it and that catches you out, then that's going to result in some severe penalties. So I'm expecting CRA to play out as principles based, and those principles have been articulated really at a very high level right now, with things like secure by design and an expectation of vulnerability free and a software bill of materials, etc. But we're not yet getting into the details of, okay, what format is your SBOM going to be in? Should it be SPDX or Cyclone DX? What versions, etc., etc. Those are all being left as open-ended questions right now. But getting back to the original question, yes, I think we have seen this show before a little bit with enterprise software. And so traditional on-premises enterprise software was packaged and versions were released, but quite often people stayed stuck on older versions and wouldn't be keeping up. Whereas with cloud-based services, software as a service has kind of taken over, and there's no option there really to stay behind. There's a constant movement forwards. Now, that's very good for keeping up with security updates, because those bug fixes for vulnerabilities can be incorporated into that rolling release alongside of features. Whereas the more traditional packaged software, not only may you be missing the features, but you might be years out of date on the bug fixes. Now, I think this is one of the central challenges actually now for device manufacturers, is if CRA is saying we've got to have automated security fixes for 5 years, then that implies a network connectivity element where the firmware updates or whatever it is can be advertised and fetched. And so if you're in an air-gapped environment, which might happen with building management systems, etc., that's back then to who's going to be running around with USB sticks to fix things.
Yeah, no, there's now you say this, it comes to my mind in our ecosystem there is a desktop software tool utilized to design and commission KNX installations. It's known as ETS, and yeah, that's you need to update it in order to get the latest version. And exactly, it's not a software as a service that as soon as you log in that you have the latest, but there are dozens of thousands of installers running around with these computers, and they have this software, and when they're going to upgrade it, who knows? A very good point.
I can just add another couple of points onto that, because Chris has raised something quite useful. And that is, yes, the cloud is great because it does tend to get upgraded as part of its own infrastructure, but it also gets decommissioned without knowledge. And quite early on in this process, we were testing a smart home plug system. And this is long before there was any TST or anything. And what then happened is it relied on the server being online for the plugs to even operate. There was no local connection between the app on your phone and the socket that would then be automatic. So when this company went bust and disappeared, you had a bunch of plugs. When I say plugs, I mean wall sockets for power, became useless because you could not turn them on and off anymore with the app. didn't become useless; they just became normal wall sockets. But it highlighted the fact that if you are going to have resilience in a cloud-based service, you have to have some kind of duty of care to provide a service for a period of time, and not to then have a product that is either bricked or severely disabled or vulnerable because that company's gone under. And we've seen the same happen actually with a smart shower company, which is even worse because the showers will not even operate anymore now the company's gone bust. There's no manual override. The shower is only operated by solenoids, and the only way to make it work is through an app. The app is now no longer supported, so you can't even turn the shower on. So you then, as a consumer, have to go and pay somebody to rip out the shower and put a new one in just to be able to run the water. So examples like that, where there's a reliance on a system outside the home, whether it's an app or a cloud-based service, I think is quite dangerous. And I just wanted to add that to the mix because, yes, it's all very well saying push it in the cloud, but I also see local control as a default being quite important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in KNX, we rely on a decentralized network of devices that don't need to be connected to the internet. So there are many KNX installations from many years ago. They are running as standalone solutions. You have a few sensors and a few actuators, push buttons. That's a KNX installation. It's not connected to the internet whatsoever. And there's another challenge as well when these installations can be still deployed today, not connected to the internet, and there could be handling HVAC, lighting, access control. And if there is a vulnerability or an issue, how is that handled? Very good. Thank you so far. I believe we have 20 minutes, less than 20 minutes, but it looks like we can carry on forever. Let's tackle a few questions from the audience as well. Scott says, what is defined as a connected product regarding the PSTI regulations? Is it just the gateway device in a KNX system that has the potential to be connected to an external network? Related to what I say, in many installations, you have this network of KNX devices, which could be using our own physical layer, a twisted pair, but then there might be a gateway that is connected to the internet. So Scott is asking, is this the connected product regarding the PSTI? Is just the gateway, or is the whole subnetwork with the devices?
I'd like to this one, Chris, because we've done some action. We actually have to ask the UK government on this one because it is slightly grey area. So you're absolutely right. So the gateway connects the internet. There's no doubt that a connected device to the internet is covered under PSTI. Devices that connect to the gateway may or may not be covered, and it depends what the function is. If that device has the ability to connect to the internet through the gateway, it does have to be tested itself as well. So, for example, if it's the ability to control something, and I often use the example of Bluetooth, for example. So a Bluetooth device, like my headphones, is not considered a connected device because it's just relaying audio. Mm-hmm. But a Bluetooth toy that connects to the internet through a Bluetooth gateway app is, because there's a connection to the internet. So that's where PSTI have tried to define what that connectivity is. We do have some slides. I can actually maybe share some information with people of some clarification to try and get, because we have got a lot of questions to manufacturers around this. Ultimately, if your device connects to the internet via a gateway, then it is usually covered under the PSTI.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any input on there, Chris? From your knowledge?
I don't have anything to add on PSTI, so yeah, let's keep going.
Yes. Another very interesting question. So, with regards to CRA, when in new buildings, we're talking about in our industry, of course, in new buildings constructions from the end of 2027, what about already existing buildings that are upgrading their installations? So is this applied to the new base of buildings that are built from that point, or if you're renovating or upgrading an existing installation that also is within the CRA umbrella? Do you have knowledge on this?
So CRA applies to devices with digital elements. That's the language that they use.
Yeah.
And so what I would expect here is, as you're doing a building refurb, new devices with potentially new digital elements are being introduced. And Jonathan touched on a potentially interesting point there in combination with what you said, Jesus, which is if we look at kind of very basic functionality, press a button, something happens, then from an electronics point of view, that's a digital system, but it could be just composed out of logic gates. And that isn't something that I would expect the CRA to apply to. But the moment you put a microcontroller into something, then you're running software on that microcontroller. And at that point, I think CRA does kick in. And if we look at the electronics industry, it's just about completely dominated by things that are built around microcontrollers and then more sophisticated functionality on systems on chips. And so this will be very all-encompassing. And I think just about anything that's got connectivity, even if it's just at a kind of systems level and not anticipated to be internet connectivity, will be covered by CRA in this regard. Now, actually, it might also mean that it's really easy to meet the expectations, because if there's no internet connectivity there, then a lot of the risk vectors are immediately cut off. And so if I think of something like an electric toothbrush is an example I often use of a fairly trivial microcontroller device. It's kind of, there are electric toothbrushes with connectivity, but most of them not. And hence, what are the risks? Nobody can hack my electric toothbrush if it's not even connected to something in the first place. And so it's relatively straightforward there. And if we get into, say, a lighting control system or an HVAC control system, if there's no connectivity, then there's no vector for an attacker, and it's easy to pass those risk assessments. Whereas as soon as I do provide connectivity, and this is why if we look at the risk-based approach that's being defined, class 1 devices, which are kind of outside of the default, include smart home virtual assistants. And I think if it's not just smart homes, it's smart buildings are going to be approached in a similar way. And so that's already saying these are not default. There's extra vigilance and extra attention going to be demanded here.
Yeah, good example with a toothbrush. Going to our own example of KNX. Yes, you can have a network of devices that have no connectivity to the internet, but a potential hacker can connect to that network because it's an event-driven. There are telegrams being transmitted between devices, and they can actually tamper with the installation because there is communication going on between those devices. So, there's the difference between an actual device that can communicate. Internet connectivity is on top of it, but those devices can already be controlled, and they can be in charge of an application that can be HVAC or lighting or security, and they can be hacked or they can be accessed because they are capable of communicate. Jonathan, do you want to add something here?
Nothing really to add other than Chris's point about CRA referencing systems with digital elements. Taken at its literal level, I think it is too vague. RED talks about it as being anything with a radio device in it, Wi-Fi, and PSTN was a network connectable, which is all got different terms of the same thing. I think, although CRA has been kind of, if you like, accepted as a plan, I think some of these terms are going to end up having to be defined more closely to actually work out. It has to apply to more than logic gates. It has to have something that has an impact on an ability to be secure from a cyber perspective. So, that's my take on that, on the definition.
Yeah, all right, good. I see a few more questions here. For example, will the CRA force installations, for example, in our case, building automation control systems, to be upgraded because of the CRA? So existing installations, which are so many, will be in any way be forced to be upgraded to be compliant with security as established by the CRA? Or since this is driven by devices, you say is only when you replace a device, when you put a new device in the market?
So I don't think the CRA is going to push for existing things to be upgraded. But what I think is going to happen here is other EU legislation, like the one we were talking about in the last session, on efficiency, essentially,
Yes.
will mandate upgrades, and the new equipment being put in for that upgrade will come under the umbrella of CRA.
Correct. That's a very good point. Actually, the question refers to the EPBD is forcing to get decarbonized buildings, but this is a point when you need for example, when you're renovating a building and you need to be compliant with EPBD, then subsequently you will need to be compliant with the CRA as well. So it comes hand in hand. Very good. You get compliments for your comments. We have a few minutes, so let's tackle one more question or two. This is with we already touched a little bit on that. What impact do you foresee in the CRA regarding logistics and supply chain management for smart home and building products? How do you think manufacturers should adapt in order to offer updates and security compliance during the product life cycle? So, bottom line, having a logistics and supply is a lot of challenges in our industry. And I'm going to give you an example. When we offer or we upgraded our specifications with security, now devices must come with a unique QR code related to this unique serial number. So that adds complexity in the logistics, because what it was before easier to be packed and shipped, now it has to be has a unique identifier. It adds complexity in the process. How do you think Cyber Resilience Act will impact logistics for manufacturers? Jonathan? Yeah.
Well, my feeling is it's been talked about all of the standards from PSPI to CRA. I see it as no different from having, FCC or CE compliance or anything else. Is that there has to be some kind of traceability for that device, and whether it's a digital QR code, whether it's actually a physical bit of paper. For a while, we were putting statements of conformity into boxes where manufacturers were literally having to go into their warehouses and reopen all their boxes to put the certificates in. That's now moved on a bit, but yes, it's part of the process. I don't mind whether it's a bit of paper or a QR code, but I do believe that's for the traceability aspect. And also, one other thing I will add is, it's to also allow the whole supply chain. If we're taking it into the context of the world of home automation, the chances are that you're not buying it from the manufacturer directly. You're probably either having it installed by an installer. That installer's probably bought it from a distributor, and that distributor's bought it from a manufacturer. So that's quite a long chain to work out. So how does the person at the very end know that all of those have been in place? And that QR code or that traceability allows the end user to know that everything's been complied with through that entire supply chain.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. And also, who is paying in the end for this? The end customer, because the product becomes more, you are doing upgrades, it's more expensive, you need to add this management of the product life cycle. The installation is more complex. We saw this happening in our industry. The installers now had to enter these QR codes. The programming or the setting up was more complex, more time, so that increases the bill. So that's another topic. The end customer is paying for this, and what is the increase of this compared to a traditional system with not the security required by the CRA? That's another session we should discuss another day. Chris, your
So it's important, I think, to consider the role of open source in this. If we look at software stacks that go into devices, then usually more than 90% isn't software that's being written by the device manufacturer. It's software that they've pulled in from open source. Mm-hmm. And in the early days of CRA, it was quite contentious because there was an expectation of software providers that seemed to be placing liabilities onto commercial software vendors like, say, Microsoft and Oracle, but also open source projects like, say, Apache Web Server or Nginx or whatever else. And the open source community kind of put their hands up to say, whoa, 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 nobody consulted us about this. And actually, none of this is funded to respond to the kind of demands that you could be placing upon it. However, the CRA has adapted around that, and it's no longer, I think, unfairly placing those expectations onto open source communities. And often this is even individuals literally doing stuff in their bedroom. But that doesn't stop the fact that most of the software that's shipping in devices is open source. So if you're understanding your supply chain now for software supply chain as well as the hardware supply chain, then getting the provenance of all of that open source and kind of tracing it back to who has been producing this, what do we understand about their diligence in putting it together, how do they respond to security vulnerability reports and known bugs, etc. Then there's a huge graph to understand. And there's tools being built now. So if we look at OpenSSF, there's a tool called GWAC, which is the graph for understanding application components. So you can feed an SBOM into that, and you can feed CVEs into that, and it'll show you where known vulnerabilities lie, and you can start analyzing whether that's actually going to be of importance to you. But all of that's predicated on, do the SBOMs even exist for these components? And as I kind of mentioned earlier, that's great if you're using modern packaged languages, and it's a horrible situation if you're using C, which is still the vast majority of systems out there. I think in the next few years, we'll see things like the major Linux distributions actually showing up with, here are the SBOMs for all of the packages in our Linux distributions. And that's going to be great if you're sitting on that kind of environment. But if we come back more into the sort of building automation world where we're more embedded systems, that's going to be more difficult. Who's going to do that even for things like Yocto, never mind the OpenWRTs or the real-time operating systems out there? Then other considerations are things like Cherry, which deals very well with memory management problems, which is at the heart of most of these vulnerabilities. Cherry have got an IoT platform, and I think CRA might end up pushing people towards looking at that and thinking this is probably a good way to go, because even if I've got bugs in my code, there's going to be a platform safety element there that I can at least bargain as being part of my CRA risk assessment, that's going to be a safety net.
We have 2 minutes left, but I think you just put the finger in the wound, and you mentioned the open source. We actually extended our ecosystem with an open source stack for the KNX over IPv6. So that has been already a concern. I just heard yesterday someone saying you shouldn't trust a VPN that doesn't have open source code, because no one then can see what's actually going underneath. So there is a lot of strong opinions here on both sides. But unfortunately, we need to stop the discussion here. Maybe we need to make a special edition only on the topic. I believe it's going to be well accepted, because our members are very eager to know more, and there is still a lot of things that can be discussed. It's a broad topic. You both contributed beautifully to it. I'm very, very happy you joined this. I couldn't think of two better people to do this than you guys. You did excellent. So thank you very much. Appreciate your input. I believe you could have said much more, but we need to jump into the next session.